Who said don't look back? Don't believe them. You go for that crazy Santa restaurant, because they're going to try and get behind you. Don't you let them do it. You know what I'm talking about? You hear me talking? You hear me talking?
On January 2nd through the 3rd, the band recorded Sappy at Reciprocal Studios. The session took 10 hours for that track alone and cost $500. Quote, "Part of that was getting a Steve Albini drum sound," said Jack. "That was the first time he seemed valuable to me. Even Sub Pop was kind of puzzled by it, and there was no reason to record it right then. No single was planned or anything. Going through all that trouble just for one song is not an efficient use of time or recording money. I told him he should just write some more songs." In March, one night, Damon Romero from Dylan's band Lush hung out with Kurt. They chose to rent the movie Straight to Hell because it featured Joe Strummer and Elvis Costello. While watching, Damon pointed at an actress on screen and said, "Hey, there's that girl from that band down in Portland." The actress was Courtney Love. On March 20th, they took advantage of Evergreen State College's TV studio while the students were away on spring break. Quote, "The original concept was to do stuff in the studio, then go to Aberdeen and shoot a bunch of other stuff and turn it into some hour-long thing they could sell to fans," said session director John Snyder. Kurt brought along one of his video compilation tapes with him, and they were added to the background via chroma key. Also that month, the band had been rehearsing at the Dutchman in Seattle. New songs ended up being In Bloom and Lithium. Chad said, quote, "I remember the first time we worked on In Bloom there. Kurt brought in the song, and it just clicked immediately." In April, Kurt and Chris showed up at Charles Peterson's studio with a kitten. Quote, "They're like, 'Take a picture. We do this thing where you pull the kitten's face back and it looks really weird.' They wanted to use it for a single or album cover. Of course, as soon as I got the camera, they couldn't get it, and I was like, okay, cuckoo, go back to Aberdeen." From April 2nd to the 6th, the band recorded sessions with Butch Vig in Studio A at Smart Studios in Madison, Wisconsin. The sessions were intended to be Nirvana's second album with Sub Pop. Vig was picked up after Sub Pop heard Killdozer's 12-Point Buck, and Poneman pitched the band by telling Butch, "These guys are going to be bigger than the Beatles." For Bleach, the band had 2 weeks of rehearsals, but for this session, most of the material was road tested. Kurt's mood was sour for the sessions. Vig said, quote, "I found immediately that he would go into these mood swings, where half an hour later he would be in a corner by himself and not talking to anyone. Very manic-depressive, and it took me a long time to figure out how his personality went in all these different directions." Kurt began to grow unhappy with Chad's drumming. Quote, "Chad seemed like a nice guy, but he seemed ill at ease. There was definitely something going on between him and Kurt, where Kurt was not psyched about something. That did come to a head at one point. Kurt climbed behind the kit and attempted to show Chad the fills on In Bloom. Kurt wasn't a good drummer, but he got his ideas across." Here She Comes Now, however, was done in one take. Chris said, "Gary from Tupelo Records called up and said he was putting out a Velvet Underground tribute record, and he wanted us to play on it. We had never played the song before, and we hardly ever played it after. We just kind of hashed it out. The version of Polly was so good they used it later on Nevermind. The session was planned to be released as either an EP or full-length in September 1990, but for obvious reasons later scrapped. Cassette tape copies of the session started floating around Seattle. The fact that copies existed meant that Nirvana had dubbed them and was shopping it as a demo to other labels. On April 10th, the band played the Blind Pig in Ann Arbor, and Chad's drums had started showing abuse from the band. They were being held together with duct tape. On the 18th in Massachusetts, Kurt threw a pitcher that barely missed Chad. On April 26th, the band played the Pyramid Club. Michael Levine was taking pictures of Iggy Pop that night and played him some Sub Pop artists. With Nirvana being the one he enjoyed the most, Levine took him to the show to meet the band. That same night, Kurt was wearing a Stooges shirt, and the band felt it had played particularly poor. Chad had shown up late to the gig, and Kurt took out his aggressions on his drum kit again. As punishment for playing what they called a poor show with someone like Iggy Pop in the audience, Chris shaved his head out of embarrassment. The original In Bloom video shows the before and after effects at this gig. The next day, Kurt broke up with Tracy. On her birthday. What Kurt didn't say was he had already started falling for her friend Toby Vale. On May 17th, Chad played his last show with Nirvana in Boise, Idaho. A couple of weeks later, Chris and Kurt showed up at Chad's house uninvited and told him he was out. Quote, "I felt like I just killed someone," said Kurt. Coincidentally, the last photo session of the band featured Kurt and Chris under a plus sign and Chad under a minus. With Chad out of the band, they started rehearsing replacements. After bumping into Shelley one night at a bar, Dan Peters said he was up to it. Shortly after, he was called by Kurt, who said, "Wow, you want to play with us?" Practices were less than stellar. The first one, Kurt had turned up his amp so loud that Peters couldn't even hear himself drum. The second time, they showed up with a drum kit for him to play. Quote, they're like, "Would you mind playing this drum set? I'm looking at this thing. It's like something they dragged out of the garbage. If I had known that they were really serious, I would have pursued another drum kit somehow. But I wouldn't play this big hunk of shit they wanted me to play." During these practices, however, they did write Sliver. Quote, "I got to write that song with them," Peter said. "A great song will play itself. You know exactly what to do. It was written in a day and it came together in an hour. Good to go." On July 11th, Nirvana laid down the instrumental of Sliver with Indina. Quote, "Jonathan called up and was begging, 'We want Nirvana to cut this one song really fast while they're in town. Is there any way they can use Tad's equipment?' And Tad was like, 'This is our time. We're trying to record something here.' Jack just sent the band on dinner break and recorded Nirvana in an hour's time. On July 13th, Kurt and Toby officially started dating. The relationship was different though, as Toby didn't believe in titles. Quote, "You hung out with somebody if you liked them, and slept with someone if you found them attractive. No one owns anybody." They spent a lot of time playing together and listening to the Shags, the Marine Girls, the Breeders, Pixies, and the Raincoats, among other bands. Quote, "Sometimes people would try to get me to join Nirvana, and I was like, I'd rather not," said Toby. Kurt kept busy in this downtime that summer from touring by doing side projects The Fragile Sphincter with Dylan and The Bathtub Is Real tape with Toby. The title of Bathtub came from the quote, "In Olympia, we take baths, not showers." Toby said, quote, "Kurt would play the songs he was writing. I would play the songs I was writing, and we'd record them on my dad's 4-track. Sometimes I'd sing on the songs he was writing and play drums on them. Some of the riffs and lyrical ideas turned into Nirvana songs later on. I never got him to sing on any of the songs I was writing, but that was okay. They were my throwaway songs. He did play drums on some of my guitar songs and helped me figure out which ones were good. He was really into the fact that I was creative and into music. I don't think he'd ever played music with a girl before. He was super inspiring and fun to play with." Slim Moon said it was like, quote, "the minimal quiet pop songs that Olympia is known for. Both of them sang. It was really good. Kurt was still telling Toby he was going to make a Bathtub Is Real record 6 months or a year down the road, even though we all knew there was no way that Courtney would allow that to happen. He would get drunk and call her on the phone and say, 'We need to make that Bathtub Is Real record.'" On August 13th, the band had a break in touring and stayed with Buzz and the Melvins in San Francisco, California. A couple nights later, Osbourne took the band to see Scream, which featured Dave Grohl as the drummer. Quote, "I can remember Kurt telling me after the Scream show, 'I wish we could get a drummer like that.'" In August, the band started a West Coast tour opening for Sonic Youth, and Dale Crover became the drummer again. Kurt was thrilled to open for the band and was even more humbled when they treated him as an equal. Kim Gordon and Thurston Moore started putting the word in Kurt's ear to sign with their management company, Gold Mountain. At this time, Nirvana was being paid so poorly that they followed Sonic Youth's bus on tour with their Dodge van from gig to gig, looking more like fans than a band. By the end of September, Dale had to return to the Melvins, so Peters took up the job again. The band had started plans for a European tour, but by their gig on the 22nd at the Motorsports International in Garage, Peters had played his one and only show with Nirvana. Their new recruit, Dave Grohl, was in the audience. Dave became available after Scream broke up after, quote, girlfriend trouble forced bass player Skeeter Thompson to leave. Dave was a monster on the drums, and after the first practice the band knew it was the right choice, but not without a weird introduction. On the phone one night before he headed to Seattle, Dave told of a party one night with Scream in Olympia. The band stood around drinking beer, feeling awkward with the, quote, hot chocolate party, Hello Kitty people, until the music went off and someone came in with a guitar. Quote, this girl comes in and sits down and plugs in this guitar and starts playing this total bad teen suicide awful music. Bad boys, bad, die. Dave began insulting the girl with the, quote, bad fucking songs, when Kurt went, oh yeah, that's my girlfriend Toby. A couple hours after Dave's rehearsal on the 25th, Kurt appeared on Chaos on Calvin Johnson's Boy Meets Girl radio show. According to Calvin, 8 songs were performed as his format was always 4 songs, interview, 4 songs, interview. This is also where Kurt revealed Dave was the new drummer. Kurt compared Grohl to a baby Dale Crover. The session was so impromptu that even Toby didn't know, and her recording stops halfway through to switch sides of the tape. At this time, Dave had been living with Kurt in the Olympia apartment. Left to his own devices with Tracy gone and all the animals, it had become a disaster. Quote, there were nights where it was so quiet, and Kurt was in his bedroom writing lyrics or journals or poetry or whatever, and my home was the couch, which was 4.5 feet long. I'm 6 feet. It was just a fucking nightmare. Dave had spent many years on the road. Quote, Dave was raised by wolves in a van, said Jennifer Finch. He taught Kurt how to make homemade tattoos with a needle and India ink. The tattoo Kurt chose was the K Records logo. Quote, who knows what he was thinking with that tattoo, said Dylan. I think he liked the records K distributed better than the records they put out. Around this time, Kathleen Hanna had started dating Dave. Quote, Toby and Kathleen would literally say, let's go out with Nirvana, said Ian Dixon. During one fateful night of partying, Kathleen scrawled, Kurt smells like Teen Spirit on the wall of his bedroom. The marking was meant as a taunt towards Kurt because he was sleeping with Toby. She, of course, wore Teen Spirit deodorant, implying that she had marked him with her scent. Kurt took it as quite the opposite and took note of the title for later. October 11th, Dave played his first show with Nirvana at the North Shore Surf Club in Olympia. The show sold out in one day. The power blew twice during the opening number, Son of a Gun, and Dave broke a snare drum. About a week later, Nirvana was playing in London when Kurt called up Pixies manager Ken Goes to ask if he would manage them. Ken wasn't familiar with the band, but chose to meet with Kurt. When they met, Goes found Kurt was more interested in talking about the Pixies than Nirvana. Midway through the conversation, Frank Black walked in. Ken offered to introduce Kurt to Frank Black, but Kurt froze with fright. Quote, I don't think so. I can't. And he quickly left, feeling unworthy. On the 21st, the band played their second BBC show with Peel. They recorded nothing but covers. D7, Turn Around, Molly's Lips, and Son of a Gun. The European tour with L7 was sold out. It was drawing around 600 people a night. On the 26th, the band was in Edinburgh when Kurt finally met Eugene Kelly of the Vaselines. Quote, I was intrigued to find out they were so keen on us because we were incredibly obscure, Eugene said. When we arrived, their agent approached me and goes, do you want to meet Kurt? He said Kurt was nervous about meeting me. During the first week in November, Kurt and Toby broke up. Kurt insisted he ended the relationship based on being unhappy with his life at that point. He needed the next step. Quote, he was just a wreck, just a mess, said Dave. Kurt took things badly. He once again internalized his pain and hatred towards himself. He went on a mad writing spree, fueled by his own broken heart. Out of this time period came Aneurysm, Drain You, which quoted Toby's I'm lucky to have met you line, and Lounge Act, with its wearing a shield referencing his K tattoo. In November, Kurt started heroin. He He had told Chris, who quickly told Dave, who was in LA sitting in as a drummer for L7. When Dave got back home, Kurt admitted the same to him. Trying to play it off as cool, he asked what it was like, and Kurt replied, quote, "It sucked. It's stupid." Quote, Kurt said he wouldn't do it again, and I believed him. It seemed like a kid sticking a firecracker in a cat's butt and lighting it off for the hell of it. It didn't seem like anything at all. On November 25th, the band played the Off-Ramp Cafe in Seattle, and it was the first time they debuted Dumb, Something in the Way, and an early version of radio-friendly Unit Shifter. In the audience was A&R people from at least 8 labels. Quote, "They played Lithium, and that's when I knew. That was their first top 40 hit right there," said Ben Shepard. Charisma almost signed the band that night, offering a $200,000 advance, and Nirvana's lawyer was ready to call them 2 days later. But DGC upped things when they offered $287,000 and full merchandise rights and full royalties if the album went gold. Sub Pop was bought out for a 2% of Nirvana's next 2 albums. Sub Pop logo on the back of Nevermind, and $75,000. The band had a major label record deal, but their financial situation was still horrible. Quote, "The whole winter that Dave and I spent together in that little apartment was the most depressing time I'd had in years. It was so fucking small and dirty and cold and gray every fucking day," Kurt said. Quote, "I was bored and so poor. They had to pawn off their amps, the TV, and other items just to feed themselves on corn dogs.